Hi everybody, and thank you for joining us for the fourth installment of JOURNcomm Shoptalk, our ongoing series of video conversations with local media communications professionals. Today we are lucky enough to have David Haldeman, a longtime media professional here in the Northwest. David has worked in several different types of jobs across the communications field, starting as an on-air DJ, including things as varied as grant writing, and then marketing and communications. Currently, David is the communications director at Humanities Washington, a statewide arts and culture nonprofit that sparks conversation and critical thinking using story to bring communities together. Thank you, David, for joining us.
You're welcome. Hello.
So first off, one of the things I always try to do in my journalism classes, I think most students come to class with an idea what a reporter or a journalist is. They've seen movies and television where you've got intrepid reporters running around. Yeah. What the heck is a communications director?
Well, a communications director, there's a lot of different tasks that fall within that umbrella. So on any given day, and some of it depends on the size of your organization. I've worked for very large organizations that you had a dedicated person doing social media. You had a dedicated PR person. In my particular nonprofit, there's 9 people. I do virtually everything. I do have recently a half-time person working for me who does a few things, but what communications essentially means is, in my position, writing, PR work, which means essentially reaching out to reporters, social media posting, editing, email marketing, so sending out e-blasts, collecting emails, etc. So a lot of it involves working with words, and a lot of it also, if you're lucky like I am, also working with images, logos, branding. So one of the strengths is that a small nonprofit being able to actually really shape what the organization's brand, its message, its writing, and everything. So essentially communications involves generally language and sometimes photo editing and certain of those other things that fall under the journalism umbrella, but it's really a lot of writing.
What's a typical day at the job look like?
It really does vary. A typical day will probably involve waking up, checking social media channels. So at Humanities Washington, we have a Facebook account, Twitter, and Instagram. And I'll usually check those, respond to anything I need to. I'll plow through a bunch of emails. I'll check my calendar. We have a fairly elaborate communications calendar on everything from when the next e-blast is going out to when the next blog post is going out. So it really involves a lot of those different tasks that I kind of just described. Some of it's social media posting, some of it's just editing, some of it's writing. Just a whole bunch of different things.
And in a small staff, you talked about some of the advantages of working in a smaller organization, particularly one with a statewide reach. Yeah. You're able to really shape the messaging here. Yeah. The downside, I'm assuming, is that you are having to do everything and you're spread really thin. Yeah. Are you leaning on freelancers or interns, or what are you doing there to bring content in?
We typically use freelancers for a lot of it. So we also, I should have mentioned this too, we have a blog. Blogs are kind of becoming a little questionable in terms of how effective they are. There's a fair amount of investment that can go into them. But some of it can be also turned into print content like this. So this is the magazine. We're actually in the middle of redesigning it right now. So a lot of these posts and a lot of this writing can go into this particular publication. And just to give you a little background actually on what our nonprofit does. So we are a statewide organization who is an affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. Does anybody know what the National Endowment for the Humanities is? Or have you heard of it? Okay. Have you heard of the National Endowment for the Arts? Okay, so the National Endowment for the Humanities is basically the hidden stepsister of the National Endowment for the Arts. Basically, the arts and the humanities are very similarly funded. They're government organizations. They have a countrywide reach. We are Washington State's affiliate. The humanities, in a nutshell, is essentially how human beings try to understand each other and the world through language. So this is different from the arts. Arts has components of that, but a dance is more abstract. A painting tends to be more abstract. If you're going to be talking about the impact of that painting or that dance or that play or whatever, that's going to be a humanities activity. So what we do is we hold free lectures and discussion events throughout the state. In fact, we do around 250 of them as part of a speakers bureau where we have 35 cultural experts and scholars go out to a lot of small venues throughout the state. They're usually museums, cultural centers, libraries, places like that. Your esteemed professor was actually one of them a couple years ago doing a talk called Superhero America, the comic book character as historic lens. Did I get that right?
Pretty close.
Okay. So these tend to be important topics, interesting discussions, interesting perspectives, and they're all free. So they're free public talks. The challenge here is that we're based in Seattle, and we're not going to be able to communicate all 250 of these Speakers Bureau events. And this is only one program as part of, it's one of 6 that we actually put on. So the challenge, particularly in this position, is to figure out how to get a small library in Winthrop or in some small town to promote the event well, to reach out to their community, and to basically have this variety of different people following what are considered best practices for marketing for these events. So we send them a toolkit of, we have a sample press release they can just like fill in. We have social media images that they can post, sample social media texts. We have a large list of reporters throughout the state that we just kind of send. We usually don't target it because we don't have quite enough time to do that. But we try to give them a lot of guidance. So anyway, not to go on for too long, but I just kind of wanted to give everybody an impression of what exactly our organization does. And I think that's one of the bigger challenges is that we are small, we are statewide. The other big challenge is, as can be seen, the humanities is a very abstract concept. If we were the Washington State, the History of Washington State nonprofit, people know what the history of Washington State means. The humanities remains very abstract. We don't have a single topic we're going and trying to sort of spread and hold discussions about. So there's a lot of different challenge in this work, and I think that's something that actually I find really exhilarating and really fun, particularly given the fact that there's so much flexibility in the position. So, yeah.
David, you kind of talked about the whole nonprofit experience, and I think that's when I was in college, I had no clue what the nonprofit sector was. I just assumed that was where you did volunteer work, and there was not a living wage to be had there.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little, you have worked in a number of nonprofits. Talk a little bit about the kind of the pros and cons of that sector and what that sector does.
Yeah. So the nonprofit sector is basically, it's kind of in the name. So its goal is not to be essentially making money and selling a product. Some companies like Facebook are essentially selling you're the product on Facebook, but they're money-making organizations. Nonprofits, generally speaking, have a philanthropic board of directors. They are tax exempt, and they tend to be filling a more abstract need in society. Now, that can be fantastic because you actually go to these places and you feel like you are doing something, this is such a tired, worn out Silicon Valley phrase, but making the world a better place on some level, or at least striving to. But the flip side of that is measuring success can be really difficult. An organization, a for-profit organization, if you have sold 50,000 units and made $2 million, and that's up from the previous year, and you're able to pay your staff a bunch more and hire more staff, great. The nonprofit sector measuring success, particularly with our nonprofit, if we hold a discussion event where somebody's talking about white privilege, somebody's talking about immigration, somebody's talking about Washington State history, how do you measure whether that really made a difference? We do surveys. We try to get some idea on a scale of 1 to 6. How did you have your mind changed? Did you feel like this has been valuable to you? But at the end of the day, you can it's a little squishy. So that's the side of the nonprofit sector that can be a little challenging. But the nonprofits I've worked at have ranged from the Pacific Science Center I moved to Philly for a while, and I worked at the Pew Charitable Trusts. and the Science History Institute, which was essentially a history of science museum, and now Humanities Washington. And what they tended to have in common, all of them, was a sense of higher good and higher purpose. And marketing is kind of a dark art. And I think using that skill for what you believe is good, I think that's what has kept me in the nonprofit sector. So, yeah.
So, I just want to make it clear to students, you are making an okay living, though.
I am making an okay living.
I think that was the shocking thing to me when I transitioned into it, was realizing just how much money is out there in the nonprofit sector. And the directors and executive directors they're making a livable wage in these communities.
Yes, and I don't have a statistic to back this up, but I'm fairly sure that I heard that in the past couple decades, the nonprofit sector has grown immensely. Part of that, you could argue, might have to do with there's an increasing income inequality, where you have a large percentage of wealth at the top going towards projects that, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is a great example of this. I mean, they do fantastic work, but it's often like very wealthy people who are taking a lot of the money that they've earned and putting them into the nonprofit sector. So it has grown immensely, and typically I've been able to make a solid middle-class living in the nonprofit sector. It's not great. If I were to do my equivalent job at a lot of other for-profit institutions, I would probably be making, 30% more, I think, than I'm making right now. But I also feel really good about what I do. And I also have found almost across the board in the nonprofit sector, the people are phenomenal. They kind of all realize that we're in this place of trying to do good, and there's just a lot of congeniality that, I don't know, I've heard doesn't exist to the same degree that's in the for-profit sector. And I think, we all kind of realize that we're taking that 30% pay cut, and that we're kind of in this together. There's a little bit more of a congeniality to it.
Also noticed that you're a University of Washington graduate and went to school for journalism. Was the plan always communications, or was journalism the plan, or how did your educational skill set translate into the work that you do?
Yeah, so I went into journalism primarily because I wanted to do arts and culture writing. I realized towards the end of graduating that the route to doing arts and culture writing typically involved beat reporting. I couldn't do it. I'm just not tailored toward that kind of life. I think I could imagine, it's exhilarating and exciting and interesting but going and, typically doing the route, which at least at the time was fairly common, which was you go work at a small town newspaper for a while and then maybe work your way up to major market newspapers. I just didn't necessarily want to go that route. I also graduated from the UW in December of 2001. This is right when the dominoes started to fall in terms of journalism sort of falling into difficulties and having this sort of questions about what do we pay for and issues of what goes online and what doesn't, and subscriptions and so forth. And so I kind of ended up, applying for a few culture writing positions, and it wasn't happening. And ended up sort of falling in at the Pacific Science Center, working as the IMAX theater manager for like 7 years. And I was ordering popcorn. That was really a lot of my life for about 7 years. But while I was doing that, I started occasionally freelancing. And through networking, I ended up meeting this person who at the time was the editor of a magazine called Seattle Sound, which later became City Arts. And on a whim one time, I remember writing him an email saying, hey, are you interested in a story on, I think it was actually Christian rock in the Northwest, and with a focus on Mars Hill Church, which is now gone. But and he said, yeah, sure. And I was kind of stunned. I was like, okay, cool. So I ended up writing this feature article, and from there I started to write a couple more arts pieces. And then from there, a grant writing position opened up at the Pacific Science Center. And grant writing is sort of the fundraising arm of communications. And I started doing that, and then from there, I started to do more communications work when I moved to Pew, and then I jumped full-time into communications. All of them involve taking material and shaping a story out of them. So grant writing is an example of this. You might want to create a new program. So at the Pacific Science Center, maybe we want to do something on climate change, and we want to install some new exhibit. You start off, you do research, you get some statistics, and you start off with a problem. Here's the problem. This group of people doesn't know enough about climate change. And then the organization comes in as the hero and essentially solves it. And they say, here's what the hero is going to do. We need your support in order for the hero to, make this work happen. And there's a lot of journalism, there's a lot of research, there's a lot of storytelling that goes into that. And I think my journalism degree, learning how to write, honestly, it doesn't matter what position you go into, knowing how to write well is huge. Being part of interview processes, people pay attention to cover letters. If there's typos, if you are kind of stilted in your language, if it looks a little strange, those send off flags and signals. And yes, it's a little more important for communications-based positions, but if you're an executive director, if you're an associate director, if you're an accountant, that stuff really matters. So even if you don't end up going into a strict journalism field or even communications, what you're learning here is absolutely vital. So anyway, that was a little long-winded, but
excellent, Dave.
Yeah.
No, thank you. I think that helps a lot. And thank you for spending time with us today.
Of course. Yeah.
Excellent.